Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown from this past weekend, which saw the massive worldwide release of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which I will have to correct this headline from Deadline. It says it makes history with $378 million global start, the best ever worldwide debut for an animated film. And I have to say, au contraire, because once again, Nancy, Tony, over at Deadline, and it seems a plethora of other people who have been covering this story, once again continue to ignore a key element to understanding the historical relevancy of numbers and monetary system policy and inflation. Yes, go ahead and get triggered if that word continues to annoy you, but it still remains a fact nonetheless. Now, don't get me wrong, before your keyboard warriors go out of your way to be like, the film's doing so well. It is, and I'm not denying that fact. I just want to make it very clear. The Super Mario Bros. Film is doing incredibly well. So much so, I would say, and I think I've mentioned this in one of my comments on the post that I made over the weekend while I was out of town, I think that right now the chances of this film hitting $1 billion worldwide is about 80%, whereas before going into the movie, I was probably 60-40 that it wasn't going to happen. I still had a fair amount of confidence that that was not going to be the case. Just again, basing it off of historical standards, seeing the early projections for the film. And hey, just goes to show you, early projections don't mean jack squat in today's world and haven't really meant jack squat in quite a long time, if even ever, because this film far exceeded and outpaced anything reported by Box Office Pro, reported by even Deadline and other industry so-called experts themselves. But that does not change the fact that when you adjust for inflation, Frozen 2 still beats this movie. So we'll talk about that. We'll also be able to show you a chart, beautiful chart, showing the comparison between this and Frozen 2, especially in the estimated ticket sales for these films, because I think it is actually quite interesting, to say the very least. And we will talk about the plethora of other films that have come out this weekend, or rather that have been updated this past weekend. But before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, not that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on that way you know time video or live stream goes live on the channel. So let's go ahead and dive into it, as I'm sure the pineapple on pizza comments are already coming in from people who just want to comment without actually watching anything or actually listening to the things that I have to say. They would much rather make jokes rather than actually hear what I'm going to say. They're going to see the thumbnail, they're going to see the title, and they're going to be like, "Moo, you're coping." It's like, no, I'm literally stating the fact that this film exceptionally well. Two things can be true at once. This film is doing incredibly well, and it's pacing to be one of the highest grossing films of this year, if not the highest grossing film of this year, potentially. We'll have to wait and see. Still have a long year. But it can also be true that to say that this is the highest grossing film ever for an animated release, as far as its worldwide opening is concerned, is a bit disingenuous on the face of it, and then also is just blatantly not true, even if you just take one film and compare it to the other. So going into the actual numbers themselves, we'll go ahead and go to first the numbers.com. As you can see, Super Mario Bros. Domestic $146.3 million at over 4,000 screens, puts its per theater ratio at an insane $33,000 per screen. So this film doing incredibly well based off of all the metrics and breakdowns we've gotten from the various theater chains and the various people that track these things. The film's doing incredibly well amongst families, especially. No surprise there. This film also does not have any competition for the next month. The next real major release that might actually put some type of competition towards this movie is not going to be until Guardians Volume 3. And by then, this film will have made the vast majority of its money, and at that point, we'll just be cruising along either to $1 billion or sailing past $1 billion and maybe even making its way towards 1.2, 1.3. We'll have to, again, wait and see what the numbers are next weekend. That's when I will make my formal declaration of either surrender or a formal declaration of, hey, there's still a battle to be waged. Right now, it's leaning towards, very heavily, I might add, the film reaching $1 billion, but we do have to wait for those week 2 numbers before I make any predictions, because you all know that's how I've always done these things. Going back to that article for a second, though, right? It says it's the best ever worldwide debut for an animated film. Well, let's go ahead and pull up a list from Wikipedia, so take that with a grain of salt. And as you can see right here, it does say Super Mario Bros. Has the worldwide opening record of $377.6 million. Now, one thing to note, and one thing that I think is a bit of a problem is, for one, there are several films on this list that themselves are old enough to where when you adjust these for inflation, the numbers and the list itself begins to change, including films like Frozen 2 and Lion King and Toy Story 4 of more recent years, falling very far behind many of these other movies. It's also important to keep in mind when it comes to these films' releases, most of them have traditional 3-day weekend releases. This movie, on the other hand, had a 5-day opening over a holiday. So again, it is very much clear as to why this film is doing as well as it is. One, it's being very well received, has very positive ratings, has great word of mouth, but this also does have an opening week advantage, right? I do think that if you're going to compare opening weekends, you should actually compare the weekend numbers themselves and not the entirety of what you have in the fact that this got an extended opening weekend over a holiday season. You know, I think that you really have to compare the film's day-to-day performances, right? So if you're going to say, all right, we have the first 5 days of this, okay, well then you should have the first 5 days of this. You should have the first 5 days of that, for one. I think that that's the only fair way to actually show that metric. In addition, you should, of course, also adjust for inflation, because even with that being the case with Frozen 2, when you do some quick math and some quick equation crunching, you'll see very clearly that Frozen 2 still holds the crown, at least based off of this very small pool. Again, I've not done every single animated film on that list or plenty of other films that are not on the list. Not to mention, the further you go back in time, the less presence many of these the less presence in international communities these studios and films had at that time. It's obviously grown over the past several years, especially the last decade or so. But look at the numbers for Frozen 2, all right? So it had around a $358.5 million opening for its total. But when you adjust for inflation, $1 today versus $1 when that movie came out was $1.17. Meaning that if you use it in today's dollars, guess what? Frozen 2 is at $419 million. That's far past the Super Mario Brothers $377.6 million. Now, I also want to say for the record that Frozen 2 sucks. And even though I'm not a big fan of the Super Mario Brothers movie, I do think it is significantly better than Frozen 2. But what's also interesting is that when you do take into account the average ticket price as well, which back then in 2019 was $9.37, and you again adjust that for inflation to make sure that that is fair, it means that overall in its worldwide opening, it sold around $38.2 million. Now I can already hear people saying, yeah, but that's not fair because ticket prices might be higher or lower in the international markets. And it's like, yeah, you're right. That's why I'm using a similar metric and trying to treat as fairly as I possibly can between both of these movies. Because, hey, right now, last report we had was the average ticket price for the United States, as far as the American theaters are concerned, was $10.45. This number could be higher. This number could be lower if you take into account international ticket sales. All ticket sales really have seen an increase. Regardless, though, even with those being the case, you still have 38 million tickets being sold in its opening versus 36 million for Super Mario Brothers. What does that mean? It means, hey, both of these films did very well. Frozen 2, though, did sell more tickets and ended up being a $1.6 billion film, even though the film was ultimately trash. Whereas this movie at 36 million tickets, hey, the fact that it's tracking not too far away from this movie shows you that, hey, this film is definitely, again, if it's just this far behind and it continues to track and has stronger holds than Frozen 2 did, which I think is a decent possibility at this point, then you could see $1 billion being easily in its future. So I had to put a couple other films up against it to see how close these other films actually got. Lion King from 2019, it's interesting that this is considered an animated film, seeing that this movie was, again, it was animated, but it was part of this live action crusade that Disney's been on. That movie originally on the list had 245.9, 1.17 is the adjusted for inflation number. And as you can see, that was able to push the film to $287.7 million instead. Ice Age, Dawn of the Dinosaurs, or whatever it was, also, when you adjust that film came out in 2009, brings the original 218 to 303. So as you can see, if you went further down this list and was able to compare this to films that came out even prior to, getting closer to 2000, you might actually have even a bit more competition. Regardless of that, though, what we can see, Super Mario Brothers, even if it's not number one, is still at the top of that list and is still doing very, very well. All right. And again, I have not broken out all of these movies, but regardless of that, film's doing very well. Still very impressive for Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs to have done as well as it did. Again, when you especially take into account it had a much smaller footprint internationally than a film like Frozen 2 or Super Mario Brothers or even The Lion King. In fact, this is, if anything, this is a real a stick to the face of The Lion King, as this movie, again, comes well beneath and underneath a lot of other films. And again, this movie also, Lion King, was completely under trash. I just wanted to get that out of the way, though, because again, I do think it's important. I brought this up with other films, including films I like, right? I brought this up with John Wick. And by the way, based on the fact that John Wick Chapter 4 is not tracking very well internationally because Super Mario Brothers is dominating the market in every single way, the chances of John Wick Chapter 4 being able to beat that of John Wick Chapter 3's total worldwide numbers are right now not all that likely, I would say, are not that high. The film hasn't even crossed $300 million based off of all of the official charting that we currently have. And so I would not be surprised if that were the case. And even though the film is still obviously making profits, when you are paying more than double what you did for the original, and I love John Wick Chapter 4, and I like all the films in the John Wick series, it is definitely not the best showing that this film could have had. And why is it that we were able to say that? And what is it that's able to help us see that even more clearly? Adjusting the numbers for inflation. So this is not me picking and choosing what movies to do this for, because again, franchise I love John Wick Chapter 4, and I'm adjusting these numbers for inflation and even saying, guess what, John Wick Chapter 4 probably not going to be the highest grossing. Animated films doing the same exact thing here. So again, hold the phone there, Frozen 2 losing record, supposedly. And again, this number itself and this record itself should probably be looked further into, with people updating the charts to be a little bit more reflective and more honest to the rate of inflation, as that isn't very important. So yeah, screw you, Nancy, over at Deadline, for not keeping these numbers into account and not using these real factors. Anyway, Super Mario Brothers is still, though, as I said, doing incredibly well. 33,000 per screen is still insanely well. And as I said, very likely this film to have a small drop off in week 1 to week 2. And I think that this film is definitely going to be able to make even more going forward. John Wick Chapter 4 dropped 49% there in its third week of release. As I said, internationally, this film is seeing not nearly as strong as of a hold as it is domestically. Again, the film is still obviously a phenomenal movie, but as we all know, good movies don't always make a lot of money, and sometimes bad movies make a crap ton of money. Great example, Frozen 2. Another great example would be the live-action version of of Alice in Wonderland, right? That first film made $1 billion. The second film flopped because of how bad the first one actually was. We also have the film Air from Amazon Studios at $14.4 million. It's interesting to see Deadline talking about this movie because later on, they say, basically trying to say it's impressive. It says, new this weekend is Air, Ben Affleck directed movie. Alfec? What in the world are they thinking there? From Amazon, which WB is handling overseas, with $10.5 million from 59 markets, its global start at $30.7 million. Additional 15 markets still are included or still coming up. And then it goes on to talk about how they believe that this, for some reason, is supposed to be really, really impressive. It might not be in this one. It might be in the domestic coverage instead. But basically, they try to argue that because this film is Amazon showing itself to be putting and investing more time and money into its theatrical release and dedicating to a full theatrical release, that's the good news that you should take away from this movie. Like, that, to me, is just so disingenuous because it takes away a very important point, which is that the movie is not really doing all that well, right? It even says here by Tony. Tony's the one that said that. It soars to $20 million. And it says, basically, just ignore the fact that this film cost $90 million to make, right? It says, however, the first day release for Air is definitely hitting 20.2, a great start for a non-tentpole dramedy aimed at adults that provides a lot of hope for other distributors with similar fare. The amount here for Air would make MGM's Loomis Beam SC Champion Air to pivot from Prime Video. Kudos to their marketing team. And then, even though Air costs a reported $90 million before you take into account marketing, Amazon shelled out $125 million to land the Artist Equity Skydance project. So it cost $90 million to make. Amazon, though, spent $125 on it. So there's actually two numbers you could look at. One, the original production budget, and two, the amount of money that Amazon spent. So you could take this basically as its production budget because it's, hey, is Amazon going to get a return on its investment? And it goes on to say, and let's celebrate the fact that the streamer, forget about the economics of it all, it says. That's right. Tony just said, forget about the economics. Let's celebrate the fact that a streamer has ponied up and fully embraced a theatrical release for a second time, and it didn't hide grosses. Also, you have to think of the Apple's ears are pricking up as they embrace the theatrical model for their first movies going forward with Ridley Scott's Napoleon and Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. And again, that doesn't really mean all much of anything, right? Creed 3 you could definitely point to as being successful. But with all that being said, this film still cost $90+ million, and the fact that they spent as much money as they did, yeah, it is insane that they are running with that overall narrative. But Air at $14.4 million right now, not looking all that great for it worldwide. Dungeons & Dragons dropped 63% in its second week of release, and I'm projecting this film to be a flop. Scream 6, 36% drop, still holding on, adding a little bit more to its overall profits. His Only Son, budget of $250,000. I was able to confirm that earlier today when I got home from my trip. So this film definitely is making some profits, so kudos to them. Creed 3 also adding to its profits as well. Shazam continuing to be a box office flop. 1001, which I know nothing about and don't really care much about, is not the number 9 spot. And then a new film, Paint, has come out with a small domestic footprint, and therefore I will probably not be covering that in my overall box office coverage. Going ahead, look at the worldwide numbers. Super Mario Bros. At $377.6 million. Again, very impressive numbers there. Cannot stress that enough. This film is doing incredibly well. This film has already broken even. This film has already begun to add to its overall profits. So there is absolutely no denial that this film is doing insanely well, and again, has a good chance, a really good chance at $1 billion plus at this point in time. But again, not the highest grossing in history. In fact, if you even just compare Frozen 2 to this movie's opening domestic alone, you'll see 146 to 148, remembering that the numbers typically does not have the most up-to-date adjusted numbers, or does not have the most up-to-date metric to use for adjustment for inflation. So even with that, you still see Frozen 2 does edge out the domestic opening weekend numbers there. And I think, again, it's important to have those figures into account. Looking at the overall total, right, the domestic box office of Frozen 2 ended up being $544 million, and its international was around $1 billion. Based off of what I'm seeing here, I don't think $1 billion internationally is going to be, having a good chance for this movie, but it's still very early, and I can already hear the people saying, it hasn't gotten released in Japan yet, and there's a lot of other places, and they're going to go gaga for it. Yeah, they might go gaga for it in Japan. You are completely right. But is it going to be enough to be able to push this film push this film to the edge in areas where it may not be tracking as well in other markets? Again, it's too early to tell at this point. We have to wait for the film to actually get released and to see whether or not the people actually show up in a degree that has never been seen before in history, right? Is this going to actually break any Japanese records? It's going to be hard to say, right? Yes, you could definitely say that this is going to be a major property, but you also look to the fact that this is not a Japanese-specific movie, meaning it's not from Japanese filmmakers, and you see in Japan a lot that tends to be the films made by those of Japanese origin, like the films actually made by the country that ended up doing a lot better than some of the Western films. And even though, again, Nintendo, Mario, right, all talking about creations coming from the minds of great Japanese artists, it's still a Western movie. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether that dynamic hurts the film or has no impact on the film. And so we'll have to wait and see on that. Either way, though, film is doing very well. And based on these numbers, I think the film is definitely going to be able to surpass that of Minions: Rise of Gru. But again, we'll have to wait and see. As you can see on the day-to-day performance, Super Mario Brothers was definitely had a strong first Friday. And again, remember that this had an advantage of opening up a few days earlier. Again, look at Frozen 2. When you look at its first Friday, it had an opening weekend, a traditional opening weekend. Minions: Rise of Gru, traditional opening weekend. You look at this and you see 54 versus 113. Why is that the case? That's right. Because it had a Wednesday number, Thursday number, in addition to everything else. So this film has an advantage. That's why it would actually be more accurate to look at the past 2 days. And so it'd be more accurate to look at the 186.8 of Frozen 2 versus 204. And this is the reason why you can look and see that these films probably are going to be the overall best comparison. But it did get that advantage, and that is something that does need to be pointed out. Film is still doing well. For those that are going to misconstrue what I say, and it doesn't matter how many times I say it, people are going to still ignore that fact. If you go ahead and look at the top animated films of all time, as you can see, it is listed as the number 2 opening gross for the domestic market. And again, these are non-adjusted numbers here. And so again, when you adjust those numbers, you would see that domestically speaking, and this is the reason why, again, why is this film the number 2 film, at least at this point, based off of the minimal numbers that I have adjusted? Because it has a much larger international footprint, and that is something that this film, Frozen 2, and others have a much higher advantage of compared to some of these older films that did not have that metric. So again, I have not adjusted the numbers domestically for any of the other films, but it's very likely that these films below it, when you adjust these numbers for inflation, would probably end up matching, if not beating it, right? So those are, again, things to keep into account. It's doing very, very well, no doubt about it, but when it comes to this film and any film, including that of Frozen 2, which would also fall down this list because of the adjustment for inflation of older films, and again, maybe I'll actually do this entire chart and show you exactly what those numbers would look like just domestically. it is still, again, something that is, of course, driving me mad. $377 million, though, still incredibly impressive numbers there. And again, when you talk John Wick Chapter 4, this film right now at $268.7 million. And because of that, and because of how it's slowing internationally, again, I just don't necessarily see this film being able to catch up to Parabellum. Right, had a very strong start, very strong second weekend, but right now Mario is dominating everything. The film aired at $30.3 million. Very impressive numbers. Again, very unimpressive numbers when you compare that to the $90 million budget. It's impressive only by deadline standards. Dungeons & Dragons is set to be a flop. Scream 6 adding to its budget. His Only Son, just thought I'd mention it since it is in the top 10. Creed 3 turned $67 million, again, still adding to its profits. Shazam, still a box office flop. 1001, no real interest in that. Paint, apparently a Bob Ross film with Owen Wilson. Who's to say? Champions, still not doing much of anything, and still no reported budget. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania! I wanted to update this because, film's still set to lose money on a much more conservative estimate. Going to the box office charting, because we love doing charting here on OMB Reviews. You can see Super Mario Brothers is already at $76 million in the black. So again, already making profit. And if this film is able to get to $500+ million worldwide by the end of the next weekend, which I think is very likely, you're looking at this film having a range of somewhere, depending on where it is, somewhere around $1 billion plus. Again, keeping in mind that this film has not yet released in some countries, so do not be surprised if this film ends up being a chart breaker because of that very reason. Regardless, the film set to do very well. The film airs at $116 million in the red. It has a break even of $225 because of its $90 million budget, and again, that's just taking the $90 million budget and not what Amazon spent on it. It's looking like this film is going to end up being quite a large financial loss for Amazon when all is said and done. Dungeons & Dragons, because we now have its second week numbers, I'm projecting the film to lose somewhere between $118 and $76 million. So even though the film is doing better because of positive word of mouth, it's not going to be enough for this film to justify its existence for a sequel or anything like that. John Wick Chapter 4 is, again, slowing down quite a bit, right? I had originally projected the film to get $59 to $143 million in net gain profit. Even the low end is actually starting to become a question. Right now, compared to its first 2 weeks, it's only at 91%. Again, not the place that this film wants to be at this point. Same thing could be said for Shazam 2, which is at $110 million in the red, and they are already putting this thing onto digital media. Physical media probably won't be too long after. And this film, massive flop for Warner Brothers once again. Scream 6 adding to its profits, 65 still a flop. Operation Fortune, I haven't updated this in a while because they have not updated the numbers on the Numbers or Box Office Mojo, and those are the two sites that I use. Creed 3 adding to its profits, and the last one that I updated on the chart for this week was the $467 million that's been made by Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. 78% versus its first 2 weeks, $19 million in the red. More conservative estimate here. This film set to be a chart breaker in the negative direction, looking at $19 to $100 million in actual net losses, depending on whose charting you use. I'm actually reached out to Valiant Renegade to see if he has a standardized way of factoring in for what his break-even point is. Mine's 2.5 times the budget. If I can get confirmation on what his likely would be, I can start to maybe give a range of what the likely scenario is overall. But those are the numbers. Thank you all very much. I know this was a long one, but it was important for me to break down all of the data and try and be as open and honest and transparent with you all about the actual numbers themselves. Let me know, do you want me to actually go through and break all of these domestic releases down? Again, I think that this actually would be the fairest comparison between them all, right? To take these numbers, adjust them for inflation, use the average ticket price to get an actual sense of ticket sales versus the international, since the international community is a lot larger for the newer releases, especially over the last decade, versus the ones that came out in the early 2000s, like Shrek 2, for instance. Let me know about that in the comment section down below, and also anything else that you mentioned. And I'm sure I'm going to get a ton of pizza comments, a ton of pineapple on pizza comments, but hey, bring it. It is what it is. I've openly admitted the film is doing well, that the film is likely to make $1 billion, but I've also pointed out the fact and reality of inflation, which none of us can run from, and you could try, but you're ultimately going to fail. Anyway, let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, like the fire button, and smash the rumble button as well. I hope you all had a blessed Easter weekend, had a great Easter vigil in Pensacola. There's a great church, St. Stephen's, down there. Shout out to them. Great Easter vigil in the traditional rite. And again, hope you have a blessed Easter Monday. And remember, Easter is not just a day, it is an entire season. And so be ready to continue to celebrate that. Again, Christus resurrexit. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members who are at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Patreon with Father Luca Illick, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, who you can check out over at his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel at Eagle Writer, and Miss Modern Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my Subscribe Star people, we got Matt317, check him out on his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and the K-Man, and you can check out the K-Man over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every video and live stream, check out the top link in the video description below to join the Keeper of the Bifrost level. You also get access to other things like a podcast that I do every month with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, and also I do giveaways for my Keeper of the Bifrost level people and above, and also my Chosen of Valhalla monthly stream. If any of that stuff sounds interesting, especially those giveaways, which I do give away 4K steelbooks, all kinds of stuff all month long, check out that top link. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Easter, and as always, God bless.